and subscribe.
The idea of becoming the brain behind the twins struck several men besides Leslie Payne and proved their downfall. Payne was too shrewd for this. He hated violence, he knew the twins, and was too moderate a man to cast himself as unifying genius of Britain's gangland. During the 2 years since he changed their lives by organizing their entry into Esmeralda's barn, he had been quietly co-directing the gambling in Wilton Place and doing nicely. He arranged the business side of their new club for them, and that was all. But while he could see the dangerous elements in the twins and had no wish to be the king of crime, they offered certain possibilities which it was hard to resist. With them, there was a fortune to be made, and Leslie Payne started to use his brains and charm to work things out. This was when the rackets really started. There were endless possibilities in business fraud. Payne and the twins began to make a lot of money. The rackets varied, but the twins' role remained the same. They were the source of fear, the men behind the scenes whose name ensured results. Few of their operations misfired. When they did, lesser men would take the rap. No one would risk denouncing the twins in court. It was understood that anyone going to prison for them would be suitably rewarded and his family looked after. Betrayal was unthinkable. Thanks to the speed at which they worked, mistakes were rare. The twins and Leslie Payne ran a smooth operation. Their commonest racket was the long firm fraud, one of the simplest dishonest ways of making money ever devised. All that was needed was a little capital, an element of nerve, a frontman, and the threat of violence. For a frontman, the twins usually chose someone they had a hold on from the past. Since he had a chance of ending up in prison, he was told to take a short, expensive holiday, settle his personal affairs, arrange to bank his share of the proceeds somewhere abroad, and then get down to work. For the next few weeks, he would be busy. His job was to set up and manage a complete but fraudulent wholesale company. The success of the whole racket would depend upon the skill and credibility with which this was done. The twins had a set routine their front men followed. First, register the new company under a fictitious name, then rent a warehouse and an office and have stationery printed. Finally, begin to write to the suppliers of wholesale goods. The twins would find the money for all this. Once all these details were arranged, the long firm could start. The twins' man would visit one of the local banks and see the manager. He would explain that he was starting a business and deposit a substantial sum of money as his firm's working capital. During the next few weeks, some of this money would be withdrawn and redeposited to give the bank an impression of a thriving business. With the bank behind him, the frontman would then make the rounds of the manufacturers, giving his orders for the goods he wanted, and start trading. At this point, the firm would act legitimately, paying suppliers on the dot, selling their goods at cut-down prices to shops and any likely customers, and even placing small advertisements in trade papers. The aim was to establish instant credit. When this was done and the firm seemed to be flourishing, the twins would finally decide that the time had come for their long firm to realize its assets. Their man would be told to place maximum orders with all his suppliers. With the good name he had by now, this would be easy, and when the goods had piled up in the warehouse, the twins would give the order for them to hit the floor, being sold off in one grand slam. Everything would have to go cut rate and strictly for cash. The bargains would be remarkable: washing machines, refrigerators, crates of wine, all offered at a third of the market price. In this way, £30,000 or £40,000 could be cleared in a single day. Once the warehouse was empty, the twins' man and his staff would disappear, drawing the last of their money from the bank and leaving the supplier's bills stockpiled up in their empty office until the police arrived. If the police ever caught the long firm manager, he would admit nothing and go off to prison, remembering that the twins were outside and his money safely banked in Switzerland. There was big money for the twins in long firms. In 1962, They cleared over £100,000 from this source alone. Before long, they and Leslie Payne were talking of something more ambitious, a complex chain of fraudulent companies incorporating his know-how and their power. From there, real possibilities began. Payne had his own accountant, a pale, nervous man called Freddie Gore. He kept the books at Esmeralda's barn. He was a clever man, and it was something new for the twins to have the advice of a trained accountant for their schemes. Gore owned a dormant company called Carston Securities. Soon it was decided that the twins needed a central company of their own. Carston was ideal. Gore handled all the paperwork, revived it as the Carston Trading Company, and appointed Payne one of its new directors. Payne knew that it was no use running a seedy operation. Carston soon had a well-run central office, with a receptionist and secretaries in Great Portland Street. It had a warehouse too, together with a trading account with the Bank of Valletta. Its file of references was impressive. The Carston group of companies was ready to take wing. It was a grandiose idea, a perfectly legitimate company to underpin a range of unconnected business frauds. It could be used to undertake all manner of deals in England and abroad. Carston could easily become the twins' way into any firm in Europe. The spring of 1963 was a good time for the twins as they started to enjoy their public image as Cockney benefactors and friends of the famous, together with their parallel success as organizing criminals. Behind the drunkenness and the disorder of their lives, there appeared a real sense of purpose. Now was the moment when everything appeared to boost their power. Ronnie's madness, Reggie's gift with people, the hidden violence, the open generosity, and all their contacts through their clubs, their charities, the underground of criminals, and the Freemasonry of homosexuals. Even their ancient love of boxing came in useful. That spring they made their introduction as promoters, staging a bout between Ronnie's friend and former fellow prisoner, Bobby Ramsey, and wrestler Roy Chopper Levesque. That evening by the ringside of Bethnal Green's York Hall, they sat like feudal chieftains with followers and friends and famous guests. They had three former world champions Terry Downs, Ted Kid Berg, and Ted Kid Lewis in the audience. Also Councillor Hare. The local press gave them the usual maximum publicity. Now that the twins were learning to manipulate the law, the press, and the social world, it was inevitable that they should turn next to politicians. Ronnie had read enough of Al Capone to realize that politicians had their uses for the criminal, but the few he met at Esmeralda's barn or lunching at the House of Lords did not impress him. They smelled of trouble and he kept his distance. Now through their East End charities, the twins were meeting a few MPs under different circumstances. Ronnie began to see that possibly Capone was right. Even in Britain, it could be useful for a gangster to have a friend or two in the Mother of Parliaments. The man who impressed them both was Tom Dryburgh, Labour MP for Barking. They met him through Joan Littlewood, who brought him to their new club one night for a drink. Reggie was particularly agreeable and chatted for some while about the changing East End. Dryburgh remembered that the twins seemed interested in his role as an MP. When he attempted to explain how MPs often worked behind the scenes alleviating hardship, they were both skeptical. Reggie mentioned that he had been trying to get a friend of his, a local man, shifted from Dartmoor to a London prison on grounds of ill health. If Mr. Dryburgh were sincere, perhaps he would look into the case. As a conscientious MP with an interest in prison conditions, Dryburgh promised to make inquiries. The Home Office examined the case and the man was moved. For Dryburgh, this was one case among several hundred that he deals with in a working year. For the twins, it opened up an avenue of possibilities. Politicians had their uses which could be exploited. The twins were good at using human frailty to make men do as they were told. Quite suddenly they saw what could be done with a discreet gangster's lobby of carefully fixed members in either house, for Parliament is the one place where the criminal's two main enemies, the police and prison services, are publicly accountable. Surprising things can be achieved behind the scenes by any member willing to put the right word at the right time to an obliging civil servant. There was something quite uncanny about the twins' success during the summer of 1963. Suddenly there seemed no limit to what they could achieve, and they had the confidence to match. Their protection rackets were expanding. The first long-firm frauds based on the Carston Group were ready to be milked. These were the 625 Center, a radio and television business in the East End, and Dominion Refrigeration, a carefully built-up business in Brixton specializing in electrical goods. At the same time, Payne and Gore were looking out for other business, some of it from overseas and some of it legitimate. America had shown how gangsters can invest their money in straight businesses. The twins were ready now to do the same. Reggie was anxious to buy betting shops, tobacconists, and restaurants, and also a demolition business. His brightest idea was to take over a security firm specializing in the transport and protection of valuables. As he pointed out, this could be done through front men they controlled. The Kray name would be the best protection a security firm could hope for. There were other ways in which the twins appeared intent on following the pattern of big organizing criminals in the United States. Ronnie had read about the way American crime syndicates brought in their gunmen from another city. He flew to Glasgow several times and, introduced by Big Pat Connolly, made an agreement with the leading Gorbals gang. Later that summer, two Scots flew down to Heathrow and shot a member of the Kray twins' rival gang, the Richardsons, in the legs. Similar deals followed. The twins also started to expand outside London. Again, they found it simple to use their name as London gangsters to move in on racketeers in other towns. The secret was to know exactly whom to squeeze. Knowledge of this sort was Ronnie's speciality. The favors and the endless drinking bouts with lesser villains were beginning to pay off. The twins found men anxious to work for them in the provinces. They took over two big clubs in Birmingham, another in Leicester, and were soon organizing similar rackets to those in London. The formula of Kray power appeared universal. Although Esmeralda's barn was now losing money, they could afford to ignore it. "You worry too much. Worries for old women," Ronnie told the latest manager, and put his uncle, Alf Kray, in his place. Since he was bored with the barn, he moved his headquarters to a hotel in Seven Sisters Road. This became the place where members of the firm could sleep and drink and have their meetings. Then Ronnie felt they needed somewhere grander to entertain their followers and guests. The Cambridge Rooms, on the Kingston Bypass, appeared exactly right. A big, pretentious restaurant close enough to London and the Surrey stockbroker belt. He interviewed the manager and made it plain that he would either ruin him or join him as his partner. In time he did both, but for a while, the Cambridge Rooms became the focus for the twins' success. They staged a gala night early that autumn to celebrate their takeover, a grand Kray-style demonstration of the sort they loved. Ronnie had persuaded Sonny Liston, heavyweight champion of the world, to come as guest of honor. A telephoned message of goodwill from Billy Daniels the singer was broadcast over the loudspeakers, straight from Hollywood. Guests included journalists and criminals and fresh celebrities the twins were trying to impress. Everything was on the house. The high spot of the evening belonged to their mother. Recently the twins had bought her Solway Cross, a racehorse, for 1,000 guineas, a touching gesture, but an unsuccessful horse. When Ronnie offered a grand raffle for charity, Violet gave Solway Cross as first prize. The horse was won by a comedian. Reggie got very drunk that night, but still insisted on driving the world champion to the Dorchester in the Mercedes. Later, Liston said he was more frightened during that half hour with Reggie Kray at the wheel than at any time in the ring. After his recent escapades, it was inevitable that Ronnie should have been impressed by Ernest Shinwell. Shinwell, son of the distinguished Labour politician, dealt in dreams. His latest was to build a brand new township costing several £1 million in the raw bush outside Enugu in Nigeria. The idea had possibilities. There had already been long conferences about it. The Nigerian government was interested. Architects had been called in. If International, the construction company, had been consulted. But there were big financial difficulties. Investors were wary of putting money into what was later to become Biafra, and Ronnie soon appeared as one of Shinwell's last hopes of drumming up support. There must have been misunderstanding on both sides. Shinwell was soon giving Ronnie the big treatment, lecturing him on Africa and promising fame and riches once the town was built. He took him to the Commons, where he introduced him to his father as a rich young businessman with an idealist's interest in Black Africa. Lord Shinwell seemed impressed, so was Ronnie. Suddenly, Enugu was his dream city, and he saw himself becoming the grand young man of Africa. Shinwell arranged for him to fly out to Nigeria. An official car was waiting at the airport, and at the hotel there was a delegation of Nigerian ministers and top officials to meet this strange young Englishman who had come to build them a new city. For 3 days Ronnie was a VIP and guest of the Nigerian government. The Minister of Health personally assured Ronnie that he would have all the help his government could give. He saw the land earmarked for what was now his city. When asked what he would like to see, he asked to look around Enugu's jail. Once they were back in London, Payne quickly set up a subsidiary of Carston to handle the financing of the new scheme. Ronnie, believing in a new life around the corner, put down the deposit on a brand new Rolls. It was a shade improbable. Gangsters don't build cities, nor do penurious African politicians hand out instant fortunes. The idea of the town was viable. All that it needed now was long-term money. But it would be many years before it made Ronnie Kray the White King of Enugu. He wanted instant profits and had no capital of his own to invest. A Nigerian contractor demanded £5,000, which he claimed was due to him under agreement. Payne, who was in Enugu, found himself suddenly in jail. In England, the twins had to find the money to get their friend released. This was not difficult, but they felt angry and betrayed, Ronnie in particular. Greatness had seemed so close. Joe was a boxer and an old friend of the twins. He met Ronnie one night in a Fulham Road club just after his Nigerian hopes had folded. Without knowing what had happened, he tried borrowing £5. With all that weight you've put on, Ron, you look as if you could afford it. No one laughed. Most people knew the signs when Ronnie was depressed. Ronnie said nothing, gulped his drink, called for his coat and left. He had his boy with him, his car outside ready to take him to the Cambridge rooms for dinner. The car had reached the Kingston bypass when he changed his mind and told the driver to go back. Joe was still drinking at the bar. "I want a word with you in private." Everyone in the club was watching now as Joe followed Ronnie into the washroom. Joe did nothing to defend himself. Ronnie used his favorite knife. Joe did not cry out. When Ronnie had finished, he paused to wash his hands and straightened his tie before walking back through the bar. His car was waiting outside, and he told the driver he had better hurry or they'd be late for supper. When he had gone and the washroom door was opened, Joe was found in the corner, conscious and with half his face beside him on the floor. The surgeons at St. Stephen's Hospital used more than 70 stitches to sew it back in place. The police spent the whole night beside his bed waiting for him to talk. Reggie heard what had happened straight away. He said that Ronnie must be off his head to do a thing like that. The police were waiting to pin something on the twins. Once Joe or any witness from the club talked to the police, Ronnie was finished. "You'd better make sure no one does talk then," said Ronnie. No one did, although it took Reggie and the firm the whole night checking who was in the club and making sure that everyone understood just what was good for him. Joe knew this of his own accord. The policeman by his bed was unlucky. For a long while afterwards Joe was known as Tramlines to his friends, and that autumn Ronnie forgot his politicians and his frauds and dreams of power to begin a brief and therapeutic splurge of sadism. The Jonathan affair came soon after Joe's injury. Jonathan was a hard, good-looking little man, another old friend of the twins, and one night at the barn the twins heard he had picked a fight with a young man who was the son of one of their allies. This was an indirect challenge. Jonathan should have known better. Reggie was for caution. Ronnie worked himself into a rage. There had to be a showdown. It was 3 a.m., but Ronnie rang Jonathan, saying there was something to discuss, and he would be grateful if he would take a taxi around to Wilton Place at once. The barn was closing, the gaming room almost empty. Ronnie was in the kitchen. Jonathan was shown in. When he saw Ronnie, he tried to run. Somebody tripped him and the kitchen door slammed in his face. There was a sturdy kitchen chair. Jonathan found himself dumped in it and heard Ronnie tell his brother to hold him down. Then Ronnie took a steel knife sharpener which he had placed in the gas flame. 3 men remaining in the gaming room heard muffled screams as Ronnie branded Jonathan along each cheek. Soon after this, the twins left Esmeralda's barn for good. The gold mine was in debt, the taxman at the door. The twins had other things to worry them. Ronnie was becoming dangerous. Reggie was doing his best to keep him in control. This was hard. Sometimes he found himself involved in the excitement and needed all his strength to remind himself of where the twins' true interests lay. Left to himself, Ronnie would destroy all they had created. All he could think of was his enemies. All that he wanted was to murder them. Half drugged or drunk, he spent his time trying to decide who was against him. One of their boyhood friends had a fight in the car park of the Cambridge rooms. An ally of the twins ended with a 4-inch gash in his face. For Ronnie, this was a threat. The man who did it would be dealt with. 2 men were hired to shoot him in the legs from a passing car as he left home a few days later. Ronnie was upset to hear later that the men he'd hired had shot the wrong man. It was the culprit's brother, who had to have a leg cut off above the knee. The twins sent him a get-well message, and Reggie organized a boxing benefit to meet the doctor's bills. The one thing Reggie couldn't do was to convince his twin that he had acted cruelly or stupidly. A few days later, somebody showed Ronnie a passage from a Harold Robbins book describing a castration. Ronnie liked it and decided he would try it out on someone. A boy was said to have spoken slightingly about the twins in a Soho bar. He was the perfect victim. Ronnie arranged to have him brought to a flat where he would do the operation, but at the last moment the man bringing him lost his nerve and the boy vanished. Castration had to wait. Ronnie's sadistic daydreams could continue. In Nigeria, he had been fascinated by reports of the bestialities of the local leopard men. He began studying them, keeping the pictures of their mangled victims carefully mounted in his scrapbook, their livers and hearts removed, according to the caption, to make magic medicine. One night at the Kentucky, he was drinking with 2 boys. One of them asked how he would like to suffer the sort of pain that he inflicted. Instead of answering, he took out his favorite knife and slowly sliced across his own hand. Someone had to drive him to hospital to have it stitched. Reggie's chief problem was to keep Ronnie away from the police. Argument was useless. Much time that he could ill afford seemed to be spent in keeping him amused. Business began to suffer. There was the perpetual fear that Ronnie would land everyone in some appalling situation. Ronnie's depressions were the greatest hazard. Afterwards his nightmares started and he could easily go berserk. Reggie did all he could to keep him happy. There were his boys and there was drink. After sufficient gin or brown ale, Ronnie could forget his troubles and doze away safely in the big 4-poster he had bought for Cedar Court. He also needed people around him, especially since he now enjoyed meeting celebrities. The parties started. Soon they were getting known in certain circles. One night a well-known television don turned up at Cedar Court. So did a famous disc jockey. Then came actors, a world-famous painter, several boxers, the chairman of an engineering firm, an assortment of men from the city, and 2 young men in dark suits who turned out to be Church of England clergymen. During his Chelsea days, Ronnie had learned enough of homosexual togetherness to know what was expected. Entertainments were laid on. Some of the success of these at-homes must have been due to Ronnie's boys, some to the novelty of the locale. But by far the greatest draw was Ronnie himself. His appearance, his reputation as a criminal, his adroit mixture of sadism and perversion made him a creature of limitless appeal. He exploited the sexual overtones of violence with the same sly gusto that he brought to his more conventional acts of extortion. None of the guests seemed put off by the chance of blackmail or by the dangers of flirting with a potential killer. Presumably, this added to the excitement. Soon Ronnie was in demand as a guest at certain country houses around London. One he enjoyed was close to Brighton. It was after a weekend here that he first conceived the ambition for a country place of his own. The setup of wealthy, upper-class country living appealed to him. He was enjoying his success and the surprising range of intimate friends in high places it afforded. Around this time, a different group of men was taking an interest in him. One was a small man called Reed who had recently arrived in the East End. He had previously been in Paddington, where the name Kray occasionally cropped up among the criminals he knew. Now that he was a detective inspector at the early age of 36 and attached to Commercial Street Police Station, Leonard Reed was anxious to meet the twins. He had found them elusive, yet the more he learned of local crime, the more important they appeared to be. Witnesses were clamming up. Whenever he asked old East End informers about the twins, they changed the subject. A policeman likes to know what he is up against. When someone told Inspector Reed that the twins often used the Grave Maurice, a pub by Whitechapel Underground Station early in the evening, he decided to go along. Normally, the twins both had a sixth sense about the law and would never enter a pub where there were police. But Reed was new to the district, and when Ronnie strode into the saloon bar of the Maurice, gazing around to check on unwelcome visitors, he didn't spare a glance for the man in the grey cap sitting in the corner with a Worthington and the racing edition of the Evening News.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.